African Americans, who are so-called Negro. One of the reasons that it is bad for us to continue to just refer to ourselves as so-called Negro, that's negative. When we say so-called Negro, that's pointing out what we aren't, but it isn't telling us what we are. We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
So Brother Malcolm's declaration that we were Africans at a time when most African Americans identified as Negro was truly profound. Drawing from his Garveyite upbringing, Malcolm connected us back to the continent in ways that many other Black leaders at the time had not. At that time, many African Americans could only define the perimeters of their existence with slavery and second-class citizenship that they were facing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and oftentimes still today. But Malcolm's statement begs us to ask, what does it mean to be an African American? What part of us is African? What part of us is American? And it brings us back to that Du Boisian idea of a double consciousness. Here we are in 2022, and there is a significant movement of African Americans awakening to the idea that Africa is home. And what I wanted to do with this documentary was hear the voices of those brave souls who have decided to relocate to the continent of Africa, and in particular, here in South Africa. As I began to plan this documentary, I thought about the significant challenges that these African Americans had to face as they decided to relocate from the United States to the continent of Africa. Not only challenges related to finances and strategic planning, but also facing and dealing and confronting the years of psychological conditioning that turned our hearts and minds away from the continent of Africa. I remember seeing this movie as a child, and it was one of the earliest depictions of Africa that I can remember. No infrastructure, no buildings, no running water. The people are naked. They're in some like savannah or dirt area. And I thought to myself, man, Shaft is crazy for going to Africa. Like, why would he want to go there? Right? But that's the way Hollywood works. Hollywood has cemented these stereotypical images of Africa into the psyche of generations of African Americans. And to the point where many African Americans, not all, but some, attempt to distance themselves from Africa in just about every way possible. This cinematic indoctrination is almost inescapable. Even my own father couldn't escape it. Growing up, what did they teach you about Africa?
That which we saw on television, they never see how important it was. We didn't teach much about Africa in schools. One is our ancestors, the descendants of African slaves.
What did you think about Africa as a child?
To be honest with you, never thought about it. We never thought about it. We was busy staying alive, trying to stay alive. with the crazy Europeans.
The indoctrination in the U.S. is so thick and so deep that it's hard for people to come out of that nightmare that they're in.
Hollywood played such a devious and deceptive role in describing and defining what Africa was and is. Oddly enough, it was a movie that made me want to visit Africa.
She's your queen to be. I felt like I was living the movie Coming to America, but it was reversed.
Mm-hmm.
Going to a major international airport,
Mm-hmm.
see all the amenities
Yes.
that we have just left,
Mm-hmm.
may not be in the same context, but they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just blew my mind, man.
Yes.
Then we start going to the malls the next day,
Mm-hmm.
start seeing, like, man, they got everything like in our home in the
Yeah.
U.S.
Yeah.
Coming to America was probably the first time that Hollywood displayed Africa with opulence and wealth and infrastructure, and the people and the costumes were just aesthetically pleasing. And I looked around my little city in New Orleans and I was like, man, I want to go to Zamunda. I found South Africa to be my Zamunda. What was it about South Africa, Johannesburg?
It's developed. It's progressive and developed. If you didn't know, and if you were from Atlanta and you came here, you'd think that you would be in Buckhead in Sandton. So you don't know the difference.
What were you lied to about?
I was told that this was a third world country. And it's like the people that was telling us it was a third world country are all here. You know, all of the major manufacturers and companies are here. And it's like, wait a minute, Woolworths went out of business years ago. Toys R Us just went out of business. You know, but they're here in a third world country. You know, they have some buildings and high rises here that make some of the buildings back there pale in comparison. You know, and it's like, wait a minute. You know, we still have friends, and I know they're gonna see this, that thought we were gonna be chased by lions, and, you know, be careful, y'all be safe. We're safer here.
As diabolical as the attempts were to separate African Americans from the African continent, somewhere in our genes, in our genetic code, written in our epigenetics, was this love, this desire, and this yearning to connect with the continent of Africa. Growing up in your household, was it like a Pan-African household? Was it like a pro-Black household? Was it?
Yeah, it was definitely, there was definitely, you know, Black pride, I would say, on both sides. My mother's parents, as well as, more specifically, my mother's father. So my maternal grandfather and then my paternal grandmother were always positive about, you know, speaking anything that was Africa related. So of course, growing up, you would have sayings like African booty snatcher and, you know, things that little kids would come up with. And they would take that as an educational moment and say, listen, you know, if you want to, basically there was no making fun. You know, you were basically immediately corrected and corrected in being prideful. My grandmother was always a person of, you know, wanting us to do our additional homework and research on our people. And I remember even when I was in college, she was giving my younger cousins assignments to do book reports on like Black leaders. But when we were growing up, she was just influential in terms of just saying, listen, you know, you may think like, you know, you are a piece of a Indian or percentage of Indian, percentage of white, or percentage of whatever. And of course, we all have that in our African American history of the family and the evolution of our Blackness. But she always wanted to give credit to Africa. She made certain, like, look, but you're African.
We're going to jump back. Growing up, spent 10 years in New York and then the rest of the year kind of
in North Carolina.
What in terms of Africa, what was talked about in your home?
Oh my goodness. So my parents, they grew up in Carolina. So when they graduated high school, they moved, like most people in the South, moved to New York, moved up north. My father and mother always talked about Africa. They were very, we talk about the 70s, so a very Pan-African dialogue going on all over Brooklyn. And my father was just like the rest of the young Black males, talking about, pro-Black issues. And he worked for the homeless shelter in the city of New York. So I heard Africa all the time. My dad wore dashikis. When we moved from New York down to Eastern North Carolina, they laughed at me and my brother because we had on dashikis. So the southern, the young kids didn't know what dashikis were, but we were 11 years old wearing dashikis. So always talked about it. Didn't know where it was at the time. Didn't really have no concept of how to get there, but it was definitely very much talked about.
No, Africa wasn't mentioned in my house. Growing up as a kid, no, it wasn't mentioned. But I can look back and see the culture in my grandparents, and particularly my dad's mother and father, and just the way they dressed, the way they cooked, was seemed like it was like a African background, but they never talked about Africa.
So how did you get your Pan-African orientation?
Well, I got it from when I was in New York. They didn't teach a Black history in my hometown either, so I started learning some of Black history in New York and learning more about my culture. And my son's father, my husband, he was really into Africa, Jamaica, and stuff like that. So he dressed like African, and so we began to dress like dashikis and stuff like that, and keeping up with all the things that were going on in New York as far as Blacks and Africa. And so we started talking about it, and then it's faded away. It's kind of faded.
Definitely a Pan-African household. My mother my name is Akintunde. My middle name is Shawande. I have a Nigerian name. All of my cousins had African names and my mother graduated from Howard. Both of my parents went to Howard. And my mother had this book of African names and named all my cousins African names. And so I had that, which is big. And she was like, we don't know where you're from in Africa, but at least you're going to have an African name. And that's something that became part of me. My father, during the 80s, went to Nigeria a couple of times. So I remember him being in Nigeria, calling. You could tell it was an international call. The call was crackly, and he would call home, but he maybe would go for 2 weeks or something. My parents had friends who would come visit from Ghana or, just people from the continent that we knew. And it wasn't like there was no negativity tied to Africa. If anything, there was the opposite. There was an effort to make sure that me, my sister, didn't see Africa in a negative light.
I've been trying to get to stay in Africa, period. My first venture was 1981, where I had friends of mine that were Nigerians. And I had friends in Arkansas that were farmers. So they were asking us, could we do a mechanized farming system? So we went over there and we talked to the people, and they came back and they were telling us everything. Just as we get ready to start it, a coup came, so that rescinded all the contracts. So that killed that.
So what made you decide to invest in South Africa?
I want to live here. I bought this property because of my children. I want them to come and experience South Africa. I want all of them to come to experience Africa, period. The whole continent. So they have a better understanding of what's being done.
The people, we're the majority. Why wouldn't I want to be here? Your PTSD disappears immediately, almost immediately, and the people. Well, you don't have certain things that you have to think about or worry about being here. And let's not forget the most beautiful thing: the exchange rate. It's utterly ridiculous, and I appreciate that. So if you have some means, yeah, you can stretch it out pretty far over here.
Peace of mind, no stress. It's an easy life. Now, are there bad things here? I'm pretty sure there are. There's bad things everywhere, but I'd rather be somewhere where I have no stress. You know, I sleep better, and I have sleeping problems, but I sleep better. My mind, I have a peace of mind. You know, and yeah, it's just beautiful here.
And so definitely peaceful. I mean, I didn't even feel like I was that stressed, but when I first came here to stay this last time, it was just like I felt like layers and layers of just stress and tension, and muscles that were tight that I didn't realize were tight were just loosened, and I was just, like it says, just a feeling of freedom and peace.
And I think that's what surprised me about South Africa. Like, I can go to like Walter Sisulu's botanical garden and be like, that's a waterfall here. Like, but I just left a city. I just left an urban, and then like a couple of kilometers, I'm looking at a waterfall.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at, you know, Tembisa. That's a township. So it's like you have such an array of landscape here that really surprised me.
So coming from Ghana, living there 5 years, and then coming here, actually, I don't know very many challenges that I can even think about. I mean, it's been a very, very easy transition for us. I don't. Oh, I do. I'll tell you. I just came to mind the driving, because actually in Ghana we drove on the right side, right?
No, we drove on the left side.
We drove on the U.S. So that was similar. So the challenge that I have is to drive.
We visited Africa for the first time in 2021, April of 2021. So we had traveled to Dubai, we've traveled to Europe, the Caribbean, just like everyone else doing your traditional travel. And we said, you know what, we want to do it differently. We need to go to the continent. And we made a plan, and we came to the continent during COVID. That was in April of 2021.
And the first place you visited was South Africa?
South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, so tell me what was that feeling
Wow.
when you stepped off the plane after growing up with that Pan-African orientation?
You know what? I consider myself less conditioned than most. You know, so our people can be very, very conditioned about how we think about the world. So when I came here, I was not familiar with Johannesburg. I knew what research told me, and I had an idea of where it should be post-apartheid. But when we landed here, man, we were like, wow, this feels good. It looks good. It smells good. The infrastructure was strong, and we're like, wow. And we came in, and we came here with the intention of looking at property. So we knew even before we stepped foot on the ground that, we had a vision of what life would be like for us here in South Africa. So we came, we looked, we searched, and we purchased a home right here in Johannesburg, our first trip on the continent.
That must have been 1996, something like that. It was right around 1996. It was inspiring. The first thing that really hit me was like the magnitude of the urban lifestyle here, because I was in Johannesburg the whole time. I was in Rosebank, between Rosebank and Nasrec, which is a big expo center in the south, right as you're going into Soweto. So that's all I knew of South Africa. And there were some other Americans. We were all in this hotel in Rosebank, and just being able to meet people, having access to people. Everyone was just so friendly and welcoming. And I'll never forget meeting someone who was a business person or something, Black South African, and he was like, you know, we meet a lot of Americans who come out here and there's opportunity here, and then they go home and the communication kind of dwindles. Then we realize they were just here on vacation. And I always remembered that quote, and I was like, I don't want to be like that. So I was trying to represent and show that, you know, there are some Black Americans who take it seriously and who want to do some business. And that's kind of what motivated me to spend more time here.
When we first returned to the United States after visiting South Africa in 2019, my wife and I planned just to buy a flat in Johannesburg, and every year, every summer, bring the kids to Johannesburg, bring them to South Africa so that they could feel a connection to the continent. However, in 2020, when COVID hit and everyone was at home because of lockdown, we had an opportunity to really examine and explore what we really wanted out of life, what we wanted for our children, and where we wanted to be. So at that point, we decided that we had had enough of the United States and South Africa was going to be home. When I first arrived in Johannesburg in 2019, what I saw was a Black Mecca. I saw an industrialized, progressive, beautiful city filled with beautiful Black faces of beautiful Black people doing beautiful Black things.
If you want to see what it's like to be free of all the anxieties and pressures of living in a place that is designed to terrorize you, come here. If you want to be in a city that's progressive, that's has opportunities, you can make if you're an investor, real estate, whatever you want to do, cost of living. I've been to a lot of countries. I've stayed some places. I found nothing better.
I think they can teach us more about our history, and we can teach them more about the struggle we came through. You know, we've read about theirs, and it's similar to ours, but I think we can give them a step up, and they can give us a look back because they've gone through it, and we can learn from that. You know, I'm trying to learn the culture because, you know, we do marriage counseling and, you know, and different, you know, seminars and things like that, but I can't do it if I don't know their culture. I've got to learn their ways. I don't want to give them my head spin. I need to learn how they do things, how they look at things, and things like that. And then I can be of value to them.
There's a certain respect for the elders here.
Yeah.
In South Africa, which is used to be in our community back home.
Yeah, used to. Yeah. Yeah.
So have you experienced it?
I have. It blew me away because I missed it from home. They used to do it home, but people got away from just, you know, giving that respect to seniors and holding the doors open for them and calling them mama or calling them mommy and stuff like that. But here they do it, and I love it. I love it not because of they're giving me the attention, but they recognize my age and they recognize that I'm a senior.
Do you plan on going back to the U.S. or South Africa?
Yeah, I don't plan to go back unless I have to. This is home for me. I just feel, I've always felt like Africa was home for me. I was born and raised to be a proud Black woman, and I've always felt like this was home, that our ancestors from way back wanted somebody in their family to come back to Africa. And I don't know if it's distant relatives or somebody living someplace else that's made it here before me. But when I got back here, to me, my ancestors know that one of us made it back. Mm-hmm. One of us made it back.
if there's anything that you can tell older African Americans who may have their hesitation about visiting South Africa in particular, what would you tell them?
I would tell them come home to the motherland. If just once, come, because I know that once will make a difference in their life.
You should come check it out. You should definitely come experience its vibe, because it has its own vibe. I mean, music vibe, culture vibe, and I think also it has its history, and maybe that's a vibe too. But its history is so complex and so similar to the to Black America's United States existence, that for Black Americans, you'll definitely find a connection and further, kind of reverberation of why you are here, why each of us are here, in terms of just our being, like our ancestors and God has brought us to this place and space and time for a reason, and if you can be a witness, it's definitely worth it. It's worth your while to come be a witness of it.
Come to the continent, because this is where it all started. And unless people experience it for themselves, they're not going to understand it. And you can tell them all day long, but that's why we have a Pan-African movement. And what the most advantage of this experience for me and my wife, or at least for me, is that when you get here on the continent and you have African American communities and other people that from your culture and your way of existence here on the continent that can assist you, that can walk you through the process, that can help you, and you can relate to when you feel like it's a language barrier or it's a disconnect. You at least have African Americans here that you can connect to, and that just makes the experience more better and more fulfilling for me.
I want everybody to come. I want all 40 million African Americans to take a trip to the continent. And I think the United States government should pay for it, since they paid for the first trip over.
Wow. If I had a commercial for African Americans, that yes, I would say, I would look at the screen and say it like this: you've been duped. And for the first time in your life, you have an opportunity to travel across the Atlantic to a place that they told was not for you. But I'm here to tell you that it's most certainly for you, and you should come. And you should come today. Come to South Africa. I would say a commercial like that. And you will enjoy the pleasures of this beautiful place with its beautiful people, with so much opportunity to enhance your life and your family's life, that you should come.
Afraid to love, we were not afraid to live and learn. If you ask me who we are, I tell you that we are the brave ones. We are the ones, we are the ones. Didn't follow the chance on love, knowing that we could lose.